On this week's NESN Patriots Podcast, we will discuss what we learned from the Patriots' Week 1 win over the Houston Texans, and we will look forward to the Patriots' Week 2 matchup on the road against the Jacksonville Jaguars, also discussing this week's roster moves. Hello and welcome to the NESN Patriots Podcast. I'm Doug Kyed, joined as always by Zack Cox. Zach, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Doug. How are you? Ready for some Jags week?
Yeah, I think that this will be one of the toughest matchups of the year for the Patriots, traveling to Jacksonville when it's going to be very hot and possibly stormy. But we will get into that in, I guess, the third section of this podcast. But let's discuss the Patriots roster moves first. The news of the week is that Chad Hansen, wide receiver Riley McCarron, who muffed a punt against the Houston Texans, were both cut. Patriots placed running back Jeremy Hill on injured reserve with the torn ACL, and they signed 3 players on Tuesday, and that was wide receiver Corey Coleman, wide receiver Benny Fowler, and running back Kenyon Barner. One other minor roster move is that it looks like Jace Billingsley was released from the practice squad, and who I believed to be Kenneth Farrow was added to the practice squad. But if I'm wrong about that, then I guess we'll just ignore it that I just said that. But I guess what were your main takeaways from those roster moves?
All pretty necessary, I would say, especially after the Patriots did cut ties with Chad Hansen and with Riley McCarron, who really got the Chris Harper treatment after he muffed that punt against the Texans. I'm not expecting any of them to have really any noticeable impact on the Patriots, perhaps this season, and at the very least for the next couple of weeks. Maybe Barner has the best chance because he'll probably be the team's punt returner this weekend against Jacksonville. But with Corey Coleman, Benny Fowler, we saw it last year with Phillip Dorsett, and we've seen it last year in years past with all the receivers the Patriots have brought in really right at the beginning of the season or even into the season like these guys. It's just so hard for them to pick everything up right away, pick everything up on the fly. I mean, we've talked to Dorsett over the last couple of months. He said it pretty much took him a year to really know what he was doing in the offense. And Coleman and Fowler are both guys who obviously didn't work out at their previous stop. So I think everybody is coming into this with pretty tempered expectations. I know Corey Coleman is a first-round pick, but these seem like depth moves, and anything you get from them this season is kind of a bonus, I would say.
Yeah, I think that they're definitely just had someone crash our room real quick there, but we are borrowing Mike Reese from ESPN's office here for the day. So big thanks to Mike. I think that these are definitely just, injury insurance moves, bringing in Coleman, bringing in Benny Fowler, and then Kenyon Barner, like you said, could wind up being the punt returner after they cut Riley McCarron, but very easily could also be Patrick Chung or Chris Hogan or Rex Burkhead or even Cordero Patterson. But I would say that, if one of these 3 players gets the quickest hook, it might be Corey Coleman. They worked him out on Monday, signed him on Tuesday. And, this could just be, all right, let's see how he fits into the system. Let's see how he fits into the building. Let's see how he fits into the mentality of being a Patriot. And if it doesn't work out, then it's really no skin off the Patriots' back. Fowler, I probably would expect to stick around a little bit longer because he has some special teams coverage ability, so he might be on the punt team, the kick team, kick return team, punt return team. He just seems to have a little bit more versatility. But Coleman also definitely has the highest upside of this group because he was a first-round pick. At the same time, there's definitely a reason why he was cut or why he was traded from the Browns. There's definitely a reason why the Bills cut him after less than a month. So I wouldn't come into these signings with too high of expectations, but I'd say that Barner is definitely interesting based on his punt return ability. It is a little bit interesting that Barner, like James White, is an undersized running back, whereas Jeremy Hill, who was placed on injured reserve, was kind of more of a goal line back. So if that was Kenneth Farrow that we saw at practice, I think that's kind of an interesting move to bring him on board because he is a bigger back in the mold of maybe like a Jeremy Hill. But in the long term, Patriots might not even need that player because eventually Sony Michel's going to be coming back, and he's not the biggest back. I think he's like 215 pounds, but the Patriots are willing to use guys like Rex Burkhead and maybe even Sony Michel as those short yardage goal line type backs.
Yeah, and this whole situation does make it more important for Sony Michel to actually be a quality NFL player this year. Because if the Patriots still had a healthy Jeremy Hill in here, even if Michel struggled as a rookie, even if he just kind of didn't live up to his draft status, or it took him a little while to kind of get into kind of the full NFL mold after missing so much time this summer, they could pretty much say, okay, fine, treat it as almost a semi-redshirt year for him, kind of just keep him at the bottom of the depth chart, maybe give him a little bit of run here and there. But now, I mean, Sony Michel, when he gets back on the field, if he does get back on the field soon, he's going to have to play a pretty significant role in this Patriots offense for them to continue to be as productive as they have.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the Patriots would have, fully redshirted Sony Michel his rookie year. But if Jeremy Hill had continued to play like he did in week one, there's definitely a possibility that Sony Michel could have finished the season with 100, 125 yards, something like that. Just really getting some sparing work in there. But now with Hill out, Michel definitely has to step up as that number 2 running back behind, or even maybe the number 1 in front of Rex Burkhead moving forward. Let's get into that week 1 game real quick. Against the Texans, Patriots won 27-20. Overall, definitely an impressive game from the Patriots. What was your biggest takeaway from week 1?
Well, my biggest question coming into that game was what that new look receiving core would look like, and whether Phillip Dorsett can kind of build on the impressive offseason and preseason and training camp that he had. And he absolutely did in the first game. I mean, he had 7 catches on 7 targets, 66 yards, 1 touchdown. He was really exactly what the Patriots could have asked for in that role. Made some big catches too. I mean, during that 2-minute drill that led right up before halftime, he made 3 catches on the last 4 plays of that drive, including the touchdown catch. Made some nice athletic plays. This was what the Patriots wanted from Phillip Dorsett when they acquired him last year. It took him a long time to get there, and it's too small of a sample size to say that this is what he'll be for the team every single week. But especially considering Chris Hogan really wasn't that involved last week. He only had 1 catch. I believe he was targeted 4 or 5 times. Then it was very, very important for Phillip Dorsett to kind of step up and take on that role. We'll see how that changes again this week against a secondary in Jacksonville that's better than the secondary that Houston had this past week. But that was my biggest takeaway, is that Phillip Dorsett looked like a quality, solid number 2 wide receiver.
Yeah, and I mean, he could even be the number 1 until Edelman comes back, and we'll see, who kind of wins out that role between Dorsett and Hogan moving forward too once Edelman does come back. But definitely Dorsett was more impressive than Hogan in week 1. It is a small sample size, but we'll see how that looks moving forward. My biggest takeaway was just the Patriots defense. A lot of people came in with low expectations for them. I think people were kind of chomping at the bit to complain about the Patriots defense in that game, and they really didn't give Patriots fans many reasons to complain. They only let up 20 points, and a decent chunk of those points came off mistakes by either the offense or on special teams when Tom Brady threw his interception, which wasn't really a mistake by Brady, but I mean still it was a good defensive play by the Texans that forced the Patriots defense into some tough field position there. But no, they were great rushing the passer. They left a little bit to be desired in their run defense there. They let up, I believe it was 167 yards to the Texans running backs plus quarterback Deshaun Watson. But overall, very impressive game plan, I thought, and play calling by pseudo-defensive coordinator Brian Flores against Watson. They were really trying to bring some pressure on Watson while also containing him in the pocket. I think they did find a good mix between those two things, because they definitely brought a lot of pressure on Watson. They still let him run for 40 yards, but it seemed like last year when the Patriots played the Texans, they almost gave Watson too much time to throw because they were containing him so much. So last year he threw for over 300 yards. This year I think he threw for 160-something yards. And they did sack him 3 times. He looked
pretty off throughout the game. I mean, some of that was the Patriots defense hassling him and being able to do really what they couldn't do last year when they played him, and actually getting to the quarterback and either bringing him down or hitting him as he was throwing. It definitely looked like he might not have been quite 100%. I mean, he was probably 100% health-wise, but not kind of fully back into the player that he was last year coming off that ACL, because he did miss a couple of throws. But overall, I think it was much more a result of strong defensive play by the Patriots than shortcomings on his part.
Yeah, and I did kind of predict that heading into the game too, that Watson wouldn't quite look like himself, at least in week 1, coming off that torn ACL, and that definitely wound up being the case. But definitely a good start for the Patriots as opposed to their start in 2017 when they lost big to the Kansas City Chiefs and really did not look like themselves. So we'll see how this team looks moving forward, but definitely positive in week 1. Now week 2, they will take on the Jacksonville Jaguars, who the Patriots beat in the AFC Championship game. And we talked to Bill Belichick this morning, who said that, the Jaguars defense really looks a lot like it did last year. They replaced their slot cornerback, Aaron Colvin, with DJ Hayden, the Raiders' former first-round draft pick. So I'd say that's maybe a slight step below, but Jaguars did have 6 Pro Bowlers on their defense last year, and their defense is definitely going to be one of the best in the NFL again this year. So it's definitely a big challenge for Tom Brady and his depleted wide receiver core.
Absolutely. All 6 of those Pro Bowlers are back this season. 10 of their 11 starters overall are back this season. The only player they had to replace was Paul Posluszny, who retired, but who was probably close to the weakest link on that defense by the end anyway. So basically every real contributor on this Jaguars defense, with the exception of Colvin, who you mentioned, is back. And this is probably the best defense in the NFL, with the possible exception of Minnesota's, and they've got everybody back, so this is going to be a huge challenge for the Patriots.
Yeah, and I mean, probably their best player, or definitely the player who thinks he's the best on the Jaguars, is Jalen Ramsey, the cornerback, and we'll kind of have to see how the Jaguars choose to deploy Ramsey. Usually, Bill Belichick said this morning, Ramsey goes up against the team's number 1 wide receiver, but in this case, the Patriots' number 1 wide receiver is Chris Hogan, so I'm not really sure if that's worthy of Ramsey matching up with him. The Jaguars could either decide to have Jalen Ramsey and A.J. Boye play sides, or if they want to be brave, if they want to, really challenge Jalen Ramsey, then maybe they could have him follow around Rob Gronkowski. I think that at the very least, when Rob Gronkowski is split out wide in kind of a wide receiver role, the Jaguars probably should put Jalen Ramsey up against him, because I wouldn't say that Gronk has struggled against cornerbacks, but he's definitely not as effective while going up against a cornerback, especially a big one like Jalen Ramsey, than he is against slower players like a safety or a linebacker.
It would kind of be a fitting matchup too, given all the trash that Jalen Ramsey talked about Rob Gronkowski, and I believe it was the ESPN article, right? That he was throwing the shots at Gronk. He was really saying that whenever he matches up against a cornerback, he stinks, basically, which is a little bit of a exaggeration, but somebody, I believe it was on NFL.com, ran all the stats, and Rob Gronkowski does have legitimately worse numbers when he's matched up against cornerbacks than when he's matched up against tight ends. Obviously, that sample size is a lot smaller because he's typically against tight ends or linebackers, or safeties or linebackers, rather. I'm turning my head into pretzel right now. But, from a viewer's perspective, it would be highly entertaining to watch Rob Gronkowski and Jalen Ramsey battle this entire game.
I'm sure that Patriots fans would probably appreciate it if Gronk scored a touchdown or mossed Jalen Ramsey at some point in that game. Another thing, just while discussing the Jaguars' defense, is that Bill Belichick talked about that this morning as well. Telvin Smith and Myles Jack are probably the 2 fastest linebacker duo. It's probably the fastest 2 linebacker duo in the NFL. So the Patriots do obviously like throwing to Gronk, who, when he's matched up against faster linebackers, not quite as good of a matchup. They also really like throwing to the running backs and James White and Rex Burkhead. And while, it's probably still an advantage for Rex Burkhead or James White to be going up against Myles Jack or Telvin Smith, it's certainly a tougher matchup than they're used to against linebackers. It's not the slow, plodding linebackers that used to be in the NFL. Telvin Smith is I think he's under 220. I think that he's a pretty good matchup for a running back, and Myles Jack used to be a running back himself when he played at UCLA. So I think that he's, definitely a good matchup for a running back as well. So I think that, to be honestly, the Patriots probably will have a bit of a tough time moving the ball on the Jaguars defense because of this matchup, and because Julian Edelman is out, and because they lost some of the pieces that beat the Jaguars last year in the AFC Championship game, in Brandon Cooks, in Danny Amendola, in Dion Lewis, in Nate Solder, the left tackle as well. But not to get too ahead of myself, I think the Jaguars offense is going to have a tough time moving the ball as well.
I agree, but going back to that point you just made, the Patriots really lost their top deep threat in Brandon Cooks, who had a huge game against the Jaguars last year at 100 receiving yards, also drew 2 long pass interference penalties. I believe it was 1 against Ramsey and 1 against Bouye. So he did have success against both of those top-level corners. And then on the other end of the spectrum, Danny Amendola was the guy who was able to just kind of lurk around that underneath area, that safety valve area for Tom Brady. He had a massive catch on, I think it was 3rd and 17 late in that game. Both of those players are gone for New England, so you're going to have to see if Chris Hogan Chris Hogan gets matched up against Jalen Ramsey this entire game. That might not be a very good matchup for the Patriots, because Chris Hogan typically has not fared well when he has to match up against another team's number one cornerback. And then is Phillip Dorsett going to be able to kind of replicate what he had last week? So I definitely agree with you. I don't think this is going to be a particularly high-scoring game on the Patriots' part.
On the Phillip Dorsett topic, which obviously you discussed earlier, I am curious to see how defenses handle Phillip Dorsett moving forward, because the Patriots targeted him deep so often last year that it seems like every cornerback tries to play Dorsett off. We saw that in the preseason against, who was it, the Panthers in Week 3. We saw that in Week 1 against the Texans. Jonathan Joseph and Kevin Johnson were both really playing Dorsett off because he's probably the fastest player on the Patriots. He's one of the fastest wide receivers in the NFL. He ran a 4.28 at his pro day in Miami, and I don't think there's been any injuries that have slowed him down since then. But Tom Brady's been using him in the short passing game, so when you give him a 10-yard cushion, he's just going to run a quick in route, or he's going to run a little hitch, and Tom Brady's just going to give him the ball, and then once he's got the ball in his hands, he's actually learned how to do something after the catch as well. He said that he was learning that from Cordero Patterson. But if defenses now start to acknowledge that, okay, they're using this guy in the short passing game, and they try to jam him at the line or play him a little bit closer, then the Patriots might actually turn to him and look to play him on that deep ball. And then if that starts to happen, then you might be having safeties kind of shift over on Phillip Dorsett a little bit. So definitely going to be interesting to see how cornerbacks go against Phillip Dorsett moving forward. I think that he is a guy that you could probably jam at the line, but if he gets past you, then that might be an issue, especially a guy like A.J. Bouye, who's definitely not as fast as Phillip Dorsett.
And it's worth noting that a lot of Phillip Dorsett's biggest gains against the Texans came on routes that were similar to what Brandon Cooks had success on against Ramsey and Bouye last year, where the cornerback's playing 8, 10, 12 yards off, and he just kind of blazes down the field. Then it's either a quick comeback or an out to the sideline, and just Tom Brady's able to get that ball in there before the cornerback can react. Now, having seen that tape now from a Jaguars perspective, it'll be interesting to see how Ramsey and Bouye sort of try to play that middle ground between getting up there and jamming right in Phillip Dorsett's face and playing off him. So, because he's not that one-trick pony that he was last year. At least he doesn't look like it right now. So you do have to. It is a little bit more complicated to defend him than it was last year.
And Tom Brady certainly seems like he doesn't mind targeting Phillip Dorsett right now either. At 7 targets, caught all 7 of them, and that's definitely a good way to get on your quarterback's good side, is to catch every single pass that's thrown your way. Let's get into the Jaguars' offense. I think the biggest question mark here is Leonard Fournette and that hamstring injury. If he can't go, then TJ Yeldon would be their starting running back. They've also got Corey Grant, who's kind of more of a change of pace back. I don't know what they would do if they would bring up a third running back to fill in the gaps there. But Leonard Fournette did not practice today, but Doug Marrone said that he was at least on the field watching practice. That's definitely going to be something for the Patriots to monitor moving forward, though, because Fournette is the biggest weapon on their offense. I mean, Blake Bortles is a okay quarterback. Keelan Cole had some good games last year running at wide receiver. Dante Moncrief has done some things in the NFL, but there's no other real scary piece on that offense besides Fournette, who did have a solid rookie season.
Yeah, Leonard Fournette is easily the best player on this Jaguars offense, at least the best skill player. And if he's out, it really changes their entire game plan, because I don't think you can go into this game with TJ Yeldon as your feature back and attempt to kind of replicate what Leonard Fournette brings on the field. They're just two different types of players. And Yeldon, while he has had success in the league, he's not nearly at the level of Leonard Fournette, I don't think. And then Bortles is a polarizing guy. I think he gets way too much heat. I guess maybe people have kind of lessened on they've softened on the Blake Bortles heat over the last year or so. I think he probably got too much criticism. And then he had probably the best season of his career last year, or at least close to it. Limited those interceptions, wasn't actively losing games for his team, which you can't do when you have a defense that's that good. But he's still not actively winning games. I mean, everything I've read, I was reading up on Blake Bortles a little bit the other day to kind of prepare for this week, And there were a lot of articles saying like his number one goal this season is don't throw interceptions. And if that's your quarterback's number one goal, yeah. I mean, I guess it's a good goal. Nobody wants to throw interceptions. But if the number one thing in your mind is don't throw the ball to the other team, that means you're probably not a particularly skilled playmaker. I mean, I don't think you're going to see Blake Bortles come out in this game and throw for 350, 400 yards, especially because the wide receivers he's throwing to are pretty mediocre right now. I mean, I liked what I saw from Keelan Cole last year. He made a couple plays against the Patriots in the preseason, and then had a pretty solid rookie year as an undrafted guy. D.D. Westbrook is another player like that, and Dante Moncrief is fine. Right. There's no reason at all he should be making $9.6 million this season, but he's okay. But I mean, losing Marquise Lee from that group, they don't really have a top legitimate number one wide receiver, and if you don't have a good quarterback and you don't have particularly good wide receivers, and your star running back might be out or at least banged up, I don't know. It's gonna be tough sledding for them, I think.
I think it'll also be interesting to just see how the Patriots handle the pass rush in this game, because last week, as we were saying earlier, the Patriots really couldn't go full bore out to Deshaun Watson because of his rushing ability. Bill Belichick did talk up Blake Bortles' rushing ability in his press conference
41-yard run last week.
And Doug Marrone talked about it as well on the conference call that we had with him, is that some of the media kind of underrates Blake Bortles' rushing ability. I mean, the guy does run for a lot of yards. He has over 1,400 career rushing yards in just over 4 seasons. Like you said, he had the 41-yard rush last week. So he can definitely do some damage, but it's not to the same degree as Deshaun Watson, where, Deshaun Watson could probably, turn a run upfield for 80 yards. I think that, Blake Bortles rushing for 41 yards is definitely a little bit more of an anomaly. So I think he's definitely not the lumbering type quarterback back there that Tom Brady or Ben Roethlisberger or Eli Manning is or something. But I do think the Patriots can pin their ears back a little bit more in this game, because Bortles' first inclination is not going to be to run. It is going to be to throw and not throw those interceptions. If you do start to get pressure on him, maybe he'll either eat the sack or try to throw the ball away, and those are also positive plays for our Patriots defense.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference between Blake Bortles and a guy like Deshaun Watson is you don't have the elusiveness. You can have the mobility without having the elusiveness. I don't think you're going to see Blake Bortles do what Deshaun Watson did to the Patriots defense last year, where he was just kind of slithering in and out of these tackles and leaving guys just kind of diving on the field and missing these arm tackles. I don't think you're going to see that from Bortles. I mean, he might see a gap and just take it and run straight down the field for 15, 20 yards, which, I mean, is pretty solid if your quarterback's able to do that. But, yeah, he's definitely a different type of mobile than a guy like Watson or Newton.
Definitely. So on the Patriots, let's talk about some of their potential, injuries this week. The guys that we're really monitoring are Sony Michel, who we discussed earlier, and tight end Jacob Hollister. Both of those guys were limited in practice all week, were officially listed as questionable, and then neither one of them played. So I don't know. It'll definitely be interesting to see if Michel and Hollister could go this week. That would definitely give the Patriots offense a little bit of a boost. But if Michel can't play, then Patriots offense might not be quite as effective this week, just because they wouldn't have the option of going to Jeremy Hill like they did this week. And coming off that knee injury, I don't think that Rex Burkhead quite looked like himself in week 1. So running the ball could be a little bit of tough sledding for the Patriots until Sony Michel comes back and until Rex Burkhead fully feels like himself.
It could, yeah. I mean, Jeremy Hill was easily their most impressive ball carrier before he had that injury. The other day, what was it? I think he only carried the ball 4 times or so, but it was like 4 rushes for 25 yards or 26 yards.
He had
something
a 6-yard
like that.
carry, an 11-yard carry. I think he might have had a 12-yard carry.
And 8-yard in there somewhere. So he was ripping off some significant gains. Rex Burkhead had a few of those as well. But yeah, overall I think he averaged 3.5 yards per carry. So it was a rather pedestrian effort from him. Like you said, he is coming off that injury, so he might not have been totally 100%. And then Sony Michel, whenever he does come back, I'm not expecting him to be 100%, or maybe he might be 100% healthy, but I'm not expecting him to be the kind of stud feature back for a couple of weeks at least. I mean, I would be surprised if any time before week 5 or 6 he has a 100-yard game or something like that. So I think it's definitely going to take him a little while to ramp up and get fully used to this NFL game, having not played at all in the preseason. The Patriots do have to get him back on the field at some point, and maybe that will be this week, depending on how practice goes over these next couple days. But yeah, I think it's still going to be a lot of Rex Burkhead from a ball carrying perspective, even if Sony Michel is active.
Looking at the roster right now, let's try to predict these inactives for this week. I don't think we did great last week, if only because they did make some roster moves in there that they kind of threw it off a little bit.
We were off on the Slater-Ebner thing.
We were. Both of those guys wound up playing. We hadn't seen the full injury report, and we haven't seen the injury report heading into this week either. So if there's any sort of unknown injuries from week one, we're not aware of them at this point. But looking at this roster, let's say Sony Michel again.
Sure.
Sony Michel probably going to be inactive again. If he is active, then that obviously throws some other things off in here. Corey Coleman probably going to be inactive. That would give us 2. Jacob Hollister, we'll just kind of have to see for now. I'm not going to throw him in there for now. If we need a 7th man later, we can throw him in there. But Brian Schwenke would probably be number 3. Derek Rivers was kind of a surprise inactive last week over Keontae Davis, who actually played.
He played pretty well, too.
I think he played pretty well, so I think that we could probably throw Rivers' name in there as well as that 4th option.
A little surprising last week, going off of inactives, to see Crossan and Jackson, both of the rookie cornerbacks, inactive.
And Jason McCourty wound up playing, and he wound up playing some special teams in there as well. So I think that was maybe the big reason why Jackson and Crossan didn't play. But I think we could add both of those names in there as well. Just moving forward, until Jason McCourty proves that he shouldn't be an active roster participant, then so that gives us 6. That gives us Sony Michel, Corey Coleman, Brian Schwenke, Derek Rivers, J.C. Jackson, Keon Crossan. Who's your 7th guy in here?
7th guy. Landon Roberts.
Might be Landon Roberts, yeah.
Landon Roberts did not have a particularly good game. He only played about 20 snaps because Juwan Bentley played more snaps than any Patriots front 7 defender, which was a little bit surprising, even given how much his stock has risen over these last couple months. But yeah, as soon as Landon Roberts came into the game, his entrance really coincided with Houston's running attack kind of kicking it up another notch. They were able to target him on a couple straight plays and rip off big gains up the middle. So I mean, maybe he's a guy that you see take a seat down in this game because he doesn't play a huge role on special teams like some other guys like Nicholas Grigsby.
Yeah, I think Landon Roberts, among the group of players that we haven't mentioned yet, would probably be the favorite. Other than him, I guess it could be Benny Fowler, but I think we expect him to take on a role on special teams. And Jacob Hollister, if that hamstring isn't 100%, then he could be a possibility as well. So, so going over that again, I think that we're predicting Sony Michel, Corey Coleman, Brian Schwenke, Derek Rivers, Landon Roberts, J.C. Jackson, and Keon Crossan for our inactives. We'll see how we do next week because, like I said, week 1 we certainly weren't perfect. We got some of them, but Derek Rivers inactive was definitely a bit of a surprise, like we were saying earlier.
It was, yeah. He seems like he kind of slid down the I don't want to say fell out of favor because he still obviously has a spot on this team, and I think the Patriots still have decently high hopes for him. But it was a little bit surprising to see just kind of how his role has diminished over the last month or 2 since the start of training camp to him not even being on the active roster.
And it's another, I guess, shot there against the Patriots' recent draft picks. Derek Rivers was their top pick in 2017. The fact that he can't get onto the active roster over Keontae Davis, not a great sign. And the Patriots placed cornerback Duke Dawson, their 2018 second-round pick, on injured reserve since we talked to you guys last. So
5 of their 9 2018 picks are now on injured reserve.
Yeah, and I mean from that draft class last year, Dietrich Wise was the only one who was drafted who actually played in that game. There were Adam Butler also played and Keontae Davis also played. They were both undrafted rookies last year, but yeah, not a whole lot from this year's and last year's draft class actually helping the Patriots in these games so far.
Yeah, it's been tough sledding draft-wise for Bill Belichick over the last couple of years for sure.
I think that will probably do it for this week's podcast. We'll see how the Patriots fare against the Jaguars, but we will be back next Wednesday recapping the Jaguars game and previewing the Patriots game against the Detroit Lions. Matty P really struggled in his first game as a head coach, so we'll see how they fare this upcoming week. But if it goes anything like Matty P's first game against the Jets goes, then that could be a pretty easy matchup in week 3 for the Patriots.
That could get a little bit ugly.
Yeah, and I think some people were even saying that could be a throwing the loss column for the Patriots. I don't know. What was it? 47?
48-17, something like that. Against the Jets.
That's good for Matty P. He picked up where his defense left off in the Super Bowl, which Doug Marrone, Jaguars head coach, says that
this was wild. Yeah,
he just doesn't watch Super Bowls, and I asked him, like, what about preparing for this week's matchup by watching that game, because it's the second to last game that matters the Patriots played in. Doug Marrone said that he assumes that the offensive and defensive coaches watched it. So, I mean, if they didn't, then Jaguars coaching staff is really missing out on a golden opportunity to see how to beat the Patriots from that game.
I can see the not watching the Super Bowl live. It's weird. Most people obviously watch the Super Bowl live, but some NFL players and coaches, they don't really watch much football outside of their film study and actually playing in the game. So I guess that's not the craziest thing in the world. Still weird. But the fact that, according to Doug Marrone, he has not even rewatched the Super Bowl from last year, during which his team is playing this week, gave up 41 points and basically was shredded all over the field. So I don't know.
Yeah. Weird stuff. Doug Marrone's definitely a character. But follow NESN.com for all of your Patriots coverage. Follow me on Twitter at Doug Kyed. Follow Zach on Twitter at Zack Cox NESN. We will be traveling to Jacksonville. Hopefully we make it around that hurricane that's kind of hovering that area. Hopefully it doesn't get too far south to Jacksonville, and hopefully everyone makes it to Jacksonville safe, and hopefully everyone in the Carolinas comes out of that hurricane safe as well, because it's definitely looking pretty scary and hitting some areas that usually aren't hit by hurricanes at this time of year. So we will be back next week. Thanks for listening.